Hello, welcome back, and let's just take a look at my latest flipbook. Here I've included the shockwave itself as well with a little bit of a alpha on it, and I've made a few changes which I'll take you through, but overall I'm happy with this, and I think we should start adding more of the arcs that connect to the drone itself. So something that shoots out from maybe these two front things here out into the scene and kind of stays connected to the drone instead of following along perfectly with the shockwave. So we're getting some pretty interesting things here, and I think for one that that variation in the color ramp has made quite a big difference. If you remember that 2D electricity reference we were looking at, they tend to draw a frame and then have a blank frame, and then the frame comes back, so you get this flashing. And our color ramp is doing the same thing. So if we take a look at this one here, it looks very much like a lightning strike because it draws, disappears, like sort of pulses a few times and then fades off. And that's happening in a few places, and it looks pretty cool. And then as you can see, we're getting some nice interaction on this car and underneath this bus over here. And then as the electricity travels into the distance, if we keep watching that back wall there, we're still getting a little bit of interaction, especially down there on the back of that tower. So a bunch of pretty cool stuff going on. I think this has worked out pretty well. So let me quickly show you what I've changed. If we come back in here, if you remember, I thought the noise was a little bit too much. So I remembered we have the curve view attribute. So exactly the same as what we did with the arcs on the drone. I just took the curve view, plugged it into a ramp, and multiplied the noise by that. So I have this mask over here. So basically, if we look at this, what I've done is the parts of the electricity that is traveling outwards still has a little bit of noise on it. So it's not completely stuck to its source point, so it does change shape slightly as it moves, but the back end of the arc is completely stuck to the ground and unaffected by noise. So there's just a bit of a ramp here saying that the noise should only affect the middle of the arc, so that's reined it in a little bit. Nothing else changed on the electricity itself, and then I found out that to get a color ramp in a wrangle, you just need to still use channel ramp and then click up here and change the actual color. So basically you come to this cog, you edit parameter interface, click on the ramp itself and choose color. So that gave me my ramp, and then all I've done is put down a polywire. So the same as our drone arcs, and I've taken the alpha and used that and multiplied it by a value that seems thin enough. So we've got some pretty thin arcs over here, and they should get thinner as the alpha gets thinner, and the alpha is based on the color. So we should get loads of variation there, and as these arcs fade, they'll just get thinner until they don't exist anymore. So let's see where else we can use this setup and how we can use it to do our expanding arcs. So let me come back over here. It's basically these I'm looking for. So something not too crazy, but kind of still feels like it has a connection to its source. So let's start with, I'm gonna take what we have over here, our point cloud with our initial attributes, and I'll actually just copy this and put it over here. So we basically want the same thing, but what do I want this to do? Okay, I'm gonna skip the P scale for now. What do we have on here? We've got color and our velocity, so that's fine. Let's get our drone in. So I want drone cache, should be fine. Okay, so we have our drone. So basically I think what we can do is we still have lines copied onto the source points from these particles, but then we can ray the back end of the line onto the drone itself. So if I just come back to our line and put down a group, and we'll do what we've done before, and just make an end group here, and make that point 1 of the line. So we only have 2 points over there. And let me just remove a bunch of these. We don't need nearly as many. Right, so that's a much more manageable number. So we have these lines and they're still tracking with the source, which is basically stuck to our environment. So I guess the first thing I can do is let's put down an array, and we've got our environment here and I've got my spheres. You see I put down an assemble here, which is basically going to give me a name attribute for each sphere itself. But I don't think we need it. Right, so we just merge these two together, and then we'll array this line. Now it's getting difficult to see what's going on here. Okay, so we have our lines, and then we array it, and I'll use minimum distance again. And what I want is just the front part of the arc to be attached either to the shockwave itself or to the environment, depending on what's closer. So we've made that end group. So in the array, I'm just going to set the group here to not end. So at the moment, our end group is point number 1, which is actually the back of the point, and this is 0. So if I put this ray on, we should just be raying point 0, which at the moment is stuck to the environment. So that doesn't actually make a difference. I don't know why I did that. We already have that line copied onto a point. I guess those are source points, so if it does come super close to a piece of the mesh, we'll get a little bit of change in position, but I don't see anything. Let's try some more points. Yeah, that's kind of weird. I expected it to kind of jump into a position of the environment. Okay, I don't think we need that. So let's take another ray for now and do the opposite basically. So we will take the drone okay, and we'll set this to end, so the back of our line. Okay, so if you see what that's doing, these points are stuck to the point cloud, which is the source, and then we're taking the back of the line and sticking it back onto the drone. So that's kind of what I want. But there's a few things here that we might want to change. So for one, we can add a fall off which from the distance of the drone, so that our lines lose visibility the further or the longer they get. So let's take our drone and take our point cloud. Set our point cloud to black, our drone to white. So we just want a nice soft fall off. So at some point these points will go dark because we don't want such long lines still connected to the drone itself. So it's too early to tell how long we want that distance to be. But basically we can take this and in a wrangle we will take our same point cloud and we'll take the new color and just take our variance in color here and multiply it. So we want point from the second input color at the point number. Right, so we're just multiplying the first input by the second input's color. So we still maintain that variation, but we have a fall off based on the distance from the drone. So let's have a look what we have. So this can be our new point cloud. So we copy lines onto that, we get the new color. Then we're only keeping some of them. I'm going to boost this up a little bit. Then we're arraying for no particular reason. And then I'm just going to remove this. And then we're taking the back ends of it and sticking it back to the drone. And here you can see now that the lines, as they get longer, they're fading off. And then our new lines will come and fade off. And that's because they're just being copied onto a point that's further away, which means it's darker. The other thing we could have done was taken our actual spheres and actually copied these lines onto that. So this is getting very difficult to visualize now. So if we based this on, well, we could have done a few things. So I'll explain a little bit about that in a sec. Let's just see if we can visualize. So I'm not seeing anything here. There's our lines. What I'm thinking is we could be instead of sourcing particles on the environment, we source particles on our initial spheres. And then as those spheres are expanding, we have lines actually attached to the sphere, and then we can ray those down at another point. At the moment I'm trying to just keep some of these, but I'm not seeing anything. I guess we don't have any attributes here. So I'll just add a p-scale quickly. Or instead of that, let's do an ID. There we go. So instead of attaching lines to the environment on static points, we copy them onto the sphere with moving points. So that would give us something like this. And then we just ray that down. Okay, it doesn't like this one. So something like that. My problem with this is the moving points thing. I think it could look cool. And I actually think the one from Pacific Rim is probably doing something similar to this. So these lines are constantly scaling, and then we just have a noise moving through it. The nice thing about copying lines onto a static point cloud is, for me, it feels a little bit more like real electricity, in terms of like 2 points in the environment are found and there's an arc of energy between them, and that exists for a few frames, and then it moves on to the next section. So instead of having something that feels very solid and mobile in the scene, you end up with flashes of more static looking arcs. So I know on the drone we actually did grow the lines a bit, and that works pretty well for creeping along an object. In this instance, I've already got the creeping energy on the floor with static lines, and I'm pretty happy with the way that turned out. So I think we're good to use the same approach here, because even just testing this quickly, what is this? I think I've broken something. Even just testing this on looking at lines like this, I think there's kind of a nice feel to it. So they're not growing, they're just flashing on and then dissipating in life. So you can use either one, and maybe try both, especially if you want to try and recreate this effect here exactly. I would say probably copy the lines onto the sphere itself and then ray it onto the environment and onto the drone. I'm going to stick with my static source. Right, so where were we? So we have a nice fall off based on the distance of the drone. We've got our lines copied on, and we're raying the back of the line back onto the drone. So first thing I'm going to do right here is select something much more specific. So I'm going to take these two things here Shift G to grow the selection there. So we'll just keep those, and I'll plug that into the array just to make sure that all of our arcs are coming from the same small area on the drone. So that's looking pretty good. What else can we do? We can add a more random value to the intensity of these lines. So if I come back to our color multiplying wrangle here, I can multiply color again by random ID. Oh boy. Let me do 1 plus anyway, because I don't want any to be less. Oh, okay, yeah, because we're not multiplying anything down. We're saying keep your current color, but make it more intense by a value of random ID. And I'll just put times 10 in there. So let's see if I can see this. We can put this in a ramp as well and just make just a few of them super bright. Or maybe we want these to be a lot brighter than the ones on the ground as well. So as long as there's variation, I'm happy. So now we have a random intense color. We have our array. So what else do we need? We need our noise. So let's resample these lines and copy this noise. It's not too bad. So as usual, I'm just playing through this to see if anything jumps out at me. I think we want something a little bit more active on these arcs. But the H2 amplitude is actually working fine. So that's all good. Then we have this mask for the start and the end, which is fine as well. What we could do is boost this up a little bit. So where's our noise? Here. So we've got this noise. Let's just multiply up our age ramp so that we get a little bit more going on. That looks good. And I've actually kept the same frequency, so we'll leave that for now. And here we have a random ID driving our offset. So this is an integer. So if I do want to add a little bit of motion, and if you remember, if we think back to the arcs from the drone and even the arcs over here, there's pretty much no movement in the noise. These ones actually have 0, so I'm not offsetting at all, except a random offset for each line. There's no motion or animation in that curve. The only motion is coming from the line appearing and disappearing and the amplitude. So in this case, I'm just going to add a little bit of random noise motion onto these because they're quite long and we see them for quite a long time. I think just the amplitude would work, but it wouldn't hurt to add some subtle movement. So what do I have? I've got this integer. So we need integer to vector. Oh no, that's too roundabout. Integer to float. So I'll just rebuild the vector there. So we'll plug this in here. See if I can clean this up a little bit. So here's our noise, there's our offset. I'm taking the ID, integer to float, and here I'll do float to vector, because I just want to maintain that randomness on the offset, but add some Y motion. So I'm going to promote that, and we'll use this as the offset. So we should still be getting a random offset for each line. Yeah. And in my promoted value, I'll just put in $f times 0.1. That's way too much. So that's just subtly putting a noise motion on there. So that feels pretty good. And then, yeah, it's a pretty neat little setup. And then let's do the same thing we did in the other one, which was attribute transfer the position onto, well, we could do everything. So what do we have? We've got the shockwave, we've got the environment. I'm going to merge the environment and the drone together. So that's every physical object in the scene. So we'll just do position, match P, and what did we have before? It was something like that. So if it comes near enough to contact something, we get a little bit more of a connection over there. So I'm just taking a look. It's obviously not enough to actually break our system, but enough that we feel like the arcs want to be connected to something. So you can see over here, if we watch these ones around the wing, I just want it enough that it feels physically like it has collisions. Okay, so I think it's pretty cool actually. That noise, we might need to go down on the frequency. It's getting a little bit messy at the end. And possibly there's too many. Or I need to work on our variation in color. So I've also got variation in color built into our noise VOP. And then I've done a random super high intensity here as well. But overall, I'm pretty happy with that. And we can just merge this in maybe before the color. Let me just go down on the frequency quickly. So we just merge these two together. So here's our environment interaction electricity. And what is this? And here is our electricity that's attached to the drone. And we can run them through the same color, the same polywire, everything can be the same. Or we can do one for each. So let's do a quick flipbook of this and see how it looks. And at some point we'll need to come up with an anticipation effect here. We need to really feel like that drone is powering up to do something. Yeah, I think these arcs really add a lot to this effect. There's just something very satisfying about seeing these still connected. So at this point we'll keep moving through and adding these layers. So I don't know yet once we're comping how visible I want this electrical stuff to be. But we don't need to decide that now. There's plenty of range here in intensity, so I can always just keep the absolute brightest ones, something like this. Or we just keep all of it. And we have this crazy electrical scene. So it looks a little bit crazy to me. I think I just need to reduce the amount of lines or reduce the intensity of those ones coming out of the drone. But in terms of motion, I kind of like it. The amplitude's working nicely. You know what I think we can do to help is just decrease the distance between the drone and the source points that give us a fall off in their color. So here I've got 75. Let's try less. So the arcs will only be bright up to a certain distance from the drone. That should help kind of maintain a good level, so that at least at the start of the shockwave we get quite a lot of bright arcs, but then before the next shockwave comes everything's pretty much gone. So that works better. Yeah, I like that. Cool, and if we look at this from here, we can see there's a ton of stuff going on. So that's pretty crazy. So let's end this one over here. And in the next video, we'll start with something else. I'm thinking the dusty interaction between the shield's edge or the shockwave's edge and the environment. So I'll catch you guys in the next one.